More calls in a little while, but right now we're going to talk with Bob Stefanowski. He is a CEO, a CFO. He's a business guy, and he's running for governor. And you know how I've been talking about messaging and looking for somebody who sounds like they're on the right wavelength in terms of what needs to be said to the voters of Connecticut about the condition of the state and how it got this way. And Bob is sounding the best of any of the candidates I've heard thus far. So I wanted to get him on again so we could talk to him again and you could hear him and see if you agree. Bob, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for the kind words. How are you?
I'm not even being kind. It's just that there's a lot of dopey talk, as you know, in the world of politics, and a lot of fear at this stage in a campaign for people who are professional politicians, and they just want to play it safe and make sure nothing bad happens. And nobody wants to be the first one to start telling the truth and maybe alienating voters and going into some kind of unpredicted nosedive, a self-inflicted disaster. But then there's people like you who come out of the world of business, and you can just look at it, see what's wrong, and say it. So tell us what's wrong.
I don't know where to start. I mean, you've got 8 years of failed economic policy from Dan Malloy. You know, we've got the highest tax state in the entire nation. You've got a death tax that's driving people in droves down to Florida. I mean, that if there's not a better example of the Laffer curve, which means you tax people to the point where they leave the state, I've never seen a better example of that than Connecticut. We've got to get our taxes down. We've got to make government smaller. We've got to stop all the crazy spending, and I've been doing it in the private sector for 20 years, Todd. It takes tough decisions. It takes somebody that's willing to lead, and we can absolutely do it for the state of Connecticut.
But in the private sector, you don't have to corral huge numbers of people into supporting you. You need the support of your board of directors and investors, and if they understand you're doing what's in the best interest of the country, they're sophisticated enough to do that. But you have to convince everybody to support you while there's another party out there trying to play on their emotions and manipulate them into believing that you're going to destroy the world because you want to take away a few cents of their freebie or something.
Yeah. No, I get that question a lot, Todd, but you don't go from being an entry-level person in GE like I was, a company with 300,000 employees, to being an officer without being able to influence people, being able to get people to do what you need them to do when they don't necessarily report to you. I mean, look at Malloy. He's not even in the budget discussions. That just wouldn't happen in the private sector. So do you have to influence people in the public sector? Absolutely. But to be successful in business, you have to do the same thing. I've dealt with unions. I've dealt with conflict. I've dealt with people that don't report to me, and getting people to rally around a common goal, have a vision, and to the point you made when you kicked it off, have honest discussions with people. There are too many career politicians running around this state worrying about being elected again rather than doing the right thing for the organizations that they work for.
Okay, so let's get to the root of it, because everyone knows the root of it is the CBAC agreement. What do you do about that?
We've got to have a new discussion about it. I mean, it's no different than the private sector. When you have two parties to a contract and one of the parties can't deliver, which everyone knows the state of Connecticut cannot find $100 billion in the next 10 years, you have to have a discussion. You have to try to protect people's retirement benefits, but we're not doing anybody any good by telling them we're going to find $100 billion over the next 10 years. We have to reopen it. We have to look at it. We have to try to be fair, but that's what leadership is all about, finding a compromise that works for everyone.
Well, that makes sense, but, you know, we're in this situation where there's going to be war, I think, if you go back to the unions and you tell them now we have to face reality. Can that be done without them going into meltdown mode?
Well, you know, listen, I think what I found in my business career is people know what's going on. And I don't think if you talk to anybody in the rank and file that they're not worried about the money being there. And I can tell you the money isn't there. So you got to start with an honest discussion with the leadership about where we stand. Again, I've done it in the private sector. Mm-hmm. And if one party can't deliver, a contract is only worth what's on paper. The state of Connecticut is a sovereign entity. You can't sue it. You got to sit down and have discussions just like I've been doing in business. And I think that has the benefit in the long run of protecting everybody involved, rather than what Malloy is doing, which is kidding the unions that the checks aren't going to bounce someday. Again, it gets back to leadership as opposed to being worried about being reelected.
And what would your agenda be when you sat down with the unions? I mean, do you think there should even be public sector unions?
Well, I don't think it should be mandated. As you know, we're one of 3 states in the entire nation, without right to work. That seems a bit odd to me, but I think you've got to sit down and you got to look at the facts and you got to look at the gap that we have. The other side of it, which is the asset equation, there is a lot of money in that pension plan, and Denise Napier, our treasurer, has done a horrible job investing that money. So we could close part of this big pension deficit we have if we just took a little bit better approach to investing it. There's no silver bullet here, Todd. It's not going to be a one-year process. But if you put a business person into that office who's not as concerned about getting reelected to a second term as they are, which is doing what's right for this state, which is why I'm running and why I'm doing it, you're going to get a much better result.
All right, we're talking with Bob Stefanowski. He's a Republican running for governor. 860-522-9842. All right, Bob Stefanowski is here, candidate for governor. I like the way he's talking. We'll finish up with him and then take some calls. Bob, what else do you want us to know about your campaign?
Let me tell you about another dysfunctional thing in government. I don't know whether your listeners realize it, but you want to guess how many candidates for governor there are right now?
32.
Yeah, I thought it was 31, but
I'm just guessing.
30 of those are going to take taxpayer money to fund their campaign. So you're going to have a bunch of politicians running around. They get $1.2 million if they get into the primary, and another $6 million if they get into the general. Taxpayer money to fund their campaign, to run around and tell how broken the state is. Now, if that's not a perfect example of career politicians setting up a system to their benefit, I'm one of the only candidates who's going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to put some of my money in, and I'm crisscrossing the state right now to raise money for people that want to give to me because they believe in my policies and positions. This gubernatorial election is going to cost the state of Connecticut close to $30 million to elect our next governor. That's the perfect example of dysfunctional government.
When you put it like that, you wonder why there aren't thousands of people running.
Exactly. What do you got to lose? You're doing it on somebody else's dime. They're buying bumper stickers. They're buying yard signs for you. Dan Malloy spent $15 million to get reelected twice. $15 million of taxpayer money. Do any of your listeners hear about that? No, because their career politicians are up there talking about getting reelected. This is the type of stuff somebody with a private sector, honest background can look at this government and stop the nonsense, Todd. It's incredible.
All right, Bob Stefanowski. The website is Bob4, F-O-R, Governor, bob4governor.com. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, that's Stefanowski. He talks like a practical, down-to-earth guy who will, I think, because he makes sense and he's not pandering with what he says, I think he'll really upset a lot of people and it will get very emotional, the way it should be. And he'll have kind of a nice effect of channeling the angst in the state. That's my hope for Bob. Right now, I like him the best in terms of the messaging he's doing.